What's going on, guys? Wanted to bring you today a review of sorts, maybe more of a comparison, comparing Holosun 3X Magnifier versus Eotech Magnifier. So for the Holosun, this is the HM3X Magnifier. And the Eotech here, I've got a G33, and this is an Eotech G30. Doesn't have the rubberized housing, but I have mounted it on an Eotech flip to the side mount. So it's effectively the same version. We're going to put the G33 off to the side and just look at the G30 versus the Holosun. So I'm going to break these down with an MSRP of $650. The Eotech is significantly more expensive for the G33 model than the Holosun, which is only $240. Now in reality, you're going to find them both slightly cheaper on sale. But in many ways, the Eotech outperforms the Holosun by a small measure. However, I do think there is one area that the Holosun actually shines and outperforms the Eotech in. So we're going to get through, break down these different categories and kind of compare and contrast them. And then I'll let you guys form your own opinions at the end. So first off, we're going to look at how they lock up on the rail. So guys, I hold these side by side, the Holosun here on my right and the Eotech on my left. You'll notice that the Holosun takes up more space. It takes up an extra Picatinny slot relative to the Eotech. And so the only time you're really going to notice a difference on that is if you wanted to do something like taking a Unity riser with an Eotech EXPS. If you wanted to mount the G33 to the rail, you are able to do that because it's got a small footprint where it locks into the Picatinny. There is some overlap with them hanging off. However, they are both solid on the mount and will hold zero, at least in my experience. With the Holosun, though, with that larger size, it doesn't actually fit onto the Unity riser. So right off the bat, if that's something you're thinking about doing, the Eotech is the way to go, or the Holosun will need a riser to match up with that. Next up, we're going to take the Unity rail here. I'm going to show you how they actually lock onto the rail. So with the Eotech, this lever arm here, fairly big and beefy. It does have a very little side-to-side wobble, and it's a very affirmative, positive click as it locks up onto the rail, no wobble at all. Very well machined, good fit and finish to it. Definitely feels like quality. The Holosun, a little less so. I'll show you here as I mount it to the rail. This lever arm here does have some side-to-side wobble, and if you don't have it centered perfectly, when you latch it on here, you can see here it's not actually engaged. You have to pull it down a little bit, center it perfectly before it locks into that detent there. Once it is locked into that detent, it's very secure. There's no wobble at all. Feels very tight. I have no qualms about it losing zero, no concerns about it losing zero, but it doesn't have that same quality of the machining that the Eotech does there. Does it make a difference in practice? No, I don't think it does, but you do notice that fit and finish type quality when you're mounting them. The lockup, I'll shut up for a second and let you listen. The Holosun does, you hear that click when it drops into the up position as you're flipping to the side, though it doesn't have as solid of a click. And it doesn't have a very snappy actuation or snappy feel to it as it pops to the side. In contrast to the Eotech, I'm sure you can hear that Eotech has a very positive click, and it's also very snappy to the feel that it pops out of the way when you want it to. So the feel of the Eotech is again better. The quality of machining is better, which you would expect from an optic that costs more than double its competition. Now, in practice, once again, I don't think it's making a huge difference. As part of my very high-speed testing, I sat on the couch for 30 minutes one day and actuated them 1,000 times each, flipping to the side, then flipping back to the middle, side and back to the middle, to see if either the springs would loosen up, if either of them would lose their, if the detent would weaken, or if they'd feel anything less positive about the lockup. I didn't notice a change in either of them through the 1,000 actuations back and forth, but and in a year of owning them, neither one has failed me in that regard, but the Eotech does feel better. Next up, we'll move to the durability. I don't know the drop tests prove a lot, but people seem to like them. So here's me dropping each of them 3 times from shoulder height onto pavement. They both sustain some cosmetic damage to the housing, as you would expect. Maybe the Holosun took it a little harder with a large chip out right there, but nothing that affects function. The glass on both was fine. See some small cosmetic damage to the Eotech. And again, this is the Eotech, the G30 without the rubberized housing the G33 has. But from a durability standpoint, I think both of these are good to go. The Eotech obviously has the history in combat that the Holosun does not. but I don't think that in normal use either of these are going to fail you, even if you are dropping them. One other thing I will say that's worth noting here is that if you're using an optic in general, the higher dollar optics are going to be more durable. You're less likely to see a point of impact shift if you sustain a significant drop or significant impact of the optic that causes it to lose its zero. However, with a magnifier, all the magnifier is doing is looking through the red dot, and so as long as your red dot holds true, even if one of these were to shift slightly, it's not going to affect the zero of your rifle as long as the red dot has not shifted. So this is one case where I think you actually are not shorting yourself a significant amount in durability by choosing the cheaper of two optics. Now, how's the clarity? Same thing I'm going to say as previously, that if you're shooting out to 1,000 yards, does clarity of the glass and the coatings of the glass make a huge difference? Absolutely. With a magnifier, though, you're looking through a couple lenses and then the lenses of your red dot, and you're only shooting out to 200, maybe 300 yards. Obviously, you can stretch it further if you need to, but you're not using it to look out to extreme distances where that clarity really makes a difference. And so I don't think it's as important with a magnifier as it is with other optics where you'd see larger gains from a higher dollar optic. With all that said, the Eotech is probably slightly better, but only very slightly. I tried to look at different eye charts through them both, setting them on tables and trying to see, in low light, does one perform better than the other? I think the Eotech has a very slight edge, which you'd expect from the price difference, but nothing that I noticed when I was actually up moving around using the rifles that these magnifiers were mounted on in more dynamic situations. So once again, small edge to the Eotech. Moving on, the field of view. How's the field of view on these? They're both advertised as being about the same. I believe the Holosun is advertised as 7 degrees, while the Eotech is 7.3 degrees, so very minimal difference. I did, though, notice when I set them both on a table, looking at a target, I did have a slightly wider field of view from the Eotech than I did from the Holosun. Not enough that I noticed it in practice when I was actually moving, but if you set them stationary on the table, you will notice the Eotech has a slightly wider field of view than does the Holosun. So lastly, that brings us to our last point, is the eye relief. And guys, this is where I've noticed the biggest difference coming from LPVOs or red dots alone. Once you bring in a magnifier, you lose a whole lot of eye relief, and you really have to get your eye cheated up pretty close to the ocular or back lens of the magnifier to get a full picture where you're not getting a lot of scope shadow looking through that magnifier. And this is one where the Holosun outperforms the Eotech. The Holosun is advertised as having 2.75 inches, while the Eotech is only advertised as having 2.2 inches of eye relief. I tried my best to test these out, see how far I could get my eye from the back end of the optic without getting any scope shadow. I was getting about 2.5 inches with the Holosun and right at 2 inches with the Eotech. So I think those manufacturer's numbers are fairly accurate. And this is just a big, I'd say, a training obstacle for me that I had to kind of overcome, is getting used again to getting my eye really close to that optic, almost like if you used an ACOG, the TA51 that has the eye relief that's essentially an eyelid's worth of eye relief. That's almost how close you have to get your eye. If you're used to shooting those ACOGs and that doesn't bother you, these won't bother you at all. However, if you're used to shooting LPVOs or with red dots where you can get 4 inches or further away from the optic and still have a great picture, you're not going to have that with the magnifier. And in practice, I did notice the Holosun's extra ½ inch of eye relief actually making a slight difference when I was out there training. So for that reason, I did prefer the Holosun. Now, overall, guys, I'll let you form your own opinions. If eye relief doesn't matter a lot to you, the Eotech, slightly outperforms the Holosun on most other areas. But if you're on a budget, I don't think you're losing out on much by picking up the Holosun over the Eotech. If you're okay with the slightly more wobbly mount up, the not quite as crisp actuation, etc. I really do think the Holosun is a very good optic for the purpose it serves as a 3x magnifier, and I don't think you're losing out on a lot by choosing the Holosun. And in some cases, with that extra eye relief, I really do prefer the Holosun in some situations. Guys, thanks so much for watching. My wife gets sick of hearing me talk about guns and optics and intricacies of magnifiers she could care less about. So I appreciate your engagement. Drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you care to, and I appreciate it all. Thanks so much. Have a great day and happy shooting.